Okay, so we're on to actually number 7 rather than number 8. And this one actually comes before data presentation. It's actually focusing on questionnaires. Because at some point, once you've given us a methodology, I'm going to go do this. Well, clearly you have to go about doing it. Almost inevitably, that involves questionnaires or interviews. So I need to spend a word on that, because quite often people rush interviews and they rush the design, development and testing of questionnaires, and they can quite often come back with a bag of data responses that they don't know what to do with, that don't seem to answer the questions that they had left over in their research gap. So I need to tell you a bit about that. So first of all, questionnaires. You need to make a questionnaire work hard. In a previous recording, I said, okay, so 73% of people said yes. So what? Why wasn't it 28? Why wasn't it 98? What's the significance of 73? Why did 73 out of 100 people say yes and not no? Unless you know the answer to that question, the 2 digits, 7 and 3, don't actually help you do anything. It tells you what happened historically. In the past, 73 people liked this and 27 didn't. But what it doesn't tell you is why they didn't like it more and what you could perhaps do to improve. The 27%, why didn't they like it at all? We thought they would. But if you don't ask them the question, you cannot interpret and use those statistics. It's easy to get the statistics. It's easy to produce the pie chart in God knows how many colors to show the numbers, and you know, it looks impressive. But what can you say about it? And what will help you make recommendations, or draw conclusions first, and make recommendations to the company? It won't help. So questionnaires, you really need to think through and to make sure that you make them work hard. So you don't just get the 73%, you get an understanding of why people were on the 73% yes side and not the 27% no side. Because you need that to be able to understand those figures, to interpret them, and to see potentially how you might change things. So don't just rush after data, easy. But you have to get something that is meaningful and is going to help you draw conclusions and make recommendations. So what I suggest is, first of all, you draft your questionnaire yourself. You go back to those essential things that you don't know. What question would I need to ask to find out this thing that I don't know? Maybe I need to ask 1 question, maybe I need to ask 2 or 3. Ask them. If you need people to explain why they think A and not B, ask them. Then I suggest, once you've done that and you've got the questionnaire pretty much as good as you think you can get it, what I then want you to do is to try to test it. Test 1. Imagine what you think will be the average results. If you've done 1,000 of these things, what will the piece of software produce? What do you think the results are likely to be? Fill in your typical average questionnaire as if it was the final version. And then look at your own results and ask yourself the question, does that fill the gaps? Does it answer what was missing in objective 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? You need to be able to do that. If it doesn't answer those, fill those gaps, you obviously need to be able to change the questions, add to the questions, add more questions. Also, if it's evident that you've asked certain questions that you thought would be useful, and in fact they're not, get rid of them. Next, test number 2. Fill in one of your questionnaires as Mr. Really Difficult, or Mrs. Really Difficult if you prefer. Imagine this person has a certain viewpoint and they really want to tell you about it, and you really need to learn from it. On your questionnaire, is there room? Is there space for somebody to offer their opinion and tell you what went wrong and why, and just how bad the experience was, and what the client would prefer instead? Okay, so imagine you're Mr. Nasty, Mr. Awkward, Mr. Difficult. Can Mr. Difficult say what he would like to say? Because you don't want to lose Mr. Difficult. You want him to remain a customer, and you want him to tell others that, oh, you're getting better, you've improved this. I wrote to them and they changed this, and they'll stay with you. Thirdly, once you have tested your questionnaire in that way, and you're confident that you think you've got it about as good as you can, before you launch it, even before you show it to your workplace supervisor, send a copy of it to your tutor with an idea of what your research gap is that you're trying to fill. I'm looking for this and 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 this, and this is the questionnaire that I've come up with. Do you think this will work? Are you of the opinion that I'm obviously missing something? Well, if you haven't done those tests that I've already told you about, don't even bother sending it to us. We'll just send it back to you saying, you do your job and I'll do mine. But if you've really done what you can, you've tested it, you've thought about it in detail, and you've amended it, send it to your tutor. Ask your tutor if they can see any holes, anything missing, or any weaknesses in it, or any opportunities to improve it. Because if you send it out and it doesn't get you what you want, you're in trouble. You've got a big hole at the end of the primary research that you were supposed to be filling. Maybe we can save you that effort. If only you could give us a sense of what you're looking for, what's on your hit list, and your questionnaire. We may be able to make some useful comments at this point that can save you a hell of a lot of effort and time. So there we go. Now, the other side of that is questionnaires. There are questions like, well, how many questionnaires do I need? Well, there's a principle here, guys. The more cross-tabulations you want to do, the more questionnaires you ask, the more questionnaires you need. Oh, it's fine saying male and female. So you've got a sample of 100, and you've got 50 males and 50 females. But if you're then asking males under 25, you've probably got 8, and females under 25, 10. Females under 25 living at home, 2. Males under 25 living at home, 5. All of a sudden, those numbers are going down to such small numbers. Can you really rely on them? There's only 2 people in that situation. These 2 people could be very odd, very special, very strange, very unique cases. So the more you need to drill down, the more cross-tabulations you need to do, the more you need to send out your questionnaires and increase the response rate to be able to rely on the information you've got. You can design a brilliant questionnaire, but if so few people answer it, you haven't got any decent information. You can make all the recommendations you like to your boss, but he or she will never trust it because there just isn't enough to go on. So you need to think about who is your population? What's the total volume of people that you need to go and find out their opinion? And then what is a reasonable proportion of that, given the cross tabulations that you want to do? What sort of number do you want? What sort of number will you need to have something that is statistically reliable, that you can depend upon? And when your boss says, can you guarantee that these figures are right? You can say you can do the whole thing again and you'll come up with the same answers. Now that's reassuring. But if you only have 2 in this important situation that you want people to look at, just 2 people is not representative. So you've got to be careful with your sampling. There are lots of sources out there that can tell you and explain to you about sampling for research in businesses and in social sciences. Do look at them. I've got some links again from the Intro to Research course that you might want to look at. Then there's interviews. Well, interviews tend to lend themselves to situations where you're not just after quantitative information, you're trying to get people's feelings, opinions, ideas, observations, etc. We normally talk about semi-structured interviews. You don't just want to sit down with one person, just talk off your head together, and then do it with somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. Why? Well, it's difficult to compare, isn't it? Because you haven't asked the same questions each time. So what you need is kind of a hybrid sort of idea, a semi-structured interview where you ask basically the same questions in the same order, but if in an answer to a question you get some really interesting information, well, you can ask some more questions about that and get some more information in about that. Perhaps in future interviews, you want to include this revelation in questions you ask other people. So we call it a semi-structured interview. You've always got the basics to compare, but you're not so structured and limited. You have to say, no, I don't want to, I would love to spend time on that, but I just don't want to. I've got to do what's on the questionnaire. No, if what somebody's saying is really germane, interesting, related to your title, even if you didn't think of it before you set the questionnaire up, if they're opening up a good avenue to go down, you need to allow yourself time to go down it. It might be something really interesting for you to do that you can take up with other interviewees. So again, the same thing goes when you're designing that questionnaire. It's easy to design questionnaires, but questionnaires that get you the information that you are really after, well, that is more difficult. So just as I said about a questionnaire, go back to the things you need to find out through the interview process and ask yourself, what are the key questions that will enable me to generate the information that I need? So don't just rush your semi-structured interview pro forma. Test it, send it to us, and then, just as with your questionnaire, you can present something to your boss which is fully formed. You know, you've tried it out, you've tested it 2 or 3 times. You can take it to your boss and he will be impressed because we've looked at it, you've looked at it. You've got something that's almost bound to be able to work. He may be able to suggest, or she may be able to suggest something to add on. Fair enough. But the one thing we don't want you doing is presenting something half-baked, poorly thought through to your boss. That's not particularly impressive. So talk to us first, get our advice, suggestions, recommendations, additions, etc. Take those on board, produce the best you can before you show it to your employer. After that, what do I suggest you do? If you have the opportunity to do it, pilot it. What do I mean by that? Do it for real. Try it out on one of your customers as if you were going to do the thing for real and see what happens. because sometimes real customers come up with ideas or real colleagues come up with ideas that don't fit on your questionnaire. So pilot it with 1 or 2, try it, and then readjust it. I know that sounds a lot, but you have to completely fill in the holes that you've identified in your research gap. If you don't think through your questionnaire or your interview structures, semi-structures, you've got a real problem. You'll come home with a lot of information which you can't do much with, and which doesn't really allow you to fill these holes, to draw conclusions, and to make recommendations. And remember, that is where we're looking for you. We're looking for your ability to do sharp research, to come up with good results, which you can correctly and appropriately and legitimately interpret, from which you can draw conclusions, and from which you can make recommendations to enable the company, the organization, to change and to improve. If you don't get the data, well, you can't do the rest and be convincing. You're not going to look good. So this is another point, just like the introduction and setting it up. Here is another critical point at which this can go right or wrong. And remember, it's happening towards the end of this. You've done an awful lot of reading and writing to write your literature review. That's taken an awful lot of time. You're running out of time. You've got to do this quickly. But if you do it so quickly you don't think about it, there's a problem just waiting for you around the corner, about which you will not have the time to do anything. So plan ahead and use your tutor wisely. Okay? Okay, so moving on next time to the data presentation, analysis, interpretation chapter. That will be in our next video. Thank you very much.